Hey, Brad. Hey, Jen. We're super excited that we're all together today. Welcome, everybody. It is really, really nice to have everyone together. When we started talking about having this meeting, we were like, well, we hope that people will come, and having us all together, it's really, really great. So, are we ready to get into it?
People are still joining, which is awesome.
Yeah. All right, so if you're just joining us, we are recording right up until we get to questions. And if you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat, it's great to put faces with names. So here are the things we're running through today. Here's today's agenda. Just some things to remember, some best practices when having meetings like this. We'll go through those. Why we have a QSA. Kind of the origins of its creation here at the middle school, and also Tegan's going to talk a little bit about its origins at the high school and what happens in a QSA meeting. And in one of the most recent QSA meetings here at Goshen, students made a list of things that they want parents to know. How can I support my child if they have joined QSA, identify as queer, or have questions about gender and or sexual orientation? We'll also go into resources, and then we'll have some space for questions. So some best practices. As a DEI director here at Goshen, this is something that I go through with all of the students before almost every conversation that we have. So I thought, let's do it together as well. So being fully present is important, and speaking from the I perspective. We are all in a safe space right now to ask questions and to learn about things that we don't know about. Just remember that all of these questions are the ones you have are your questions, so make sure you're speaking from that I perspective. It's okay to also just listen and process. We're going to be giving you a lot of information. Some of it might be uncomfortable, so just lean into that, and it's what makes us stronger as a community. This one is one of my favorites, and I think is really important: to treat the candidness of others as a gift and to honor confidentiality. And suspending judgment of yourself and others. We are all learning together. And as I've been saying to a lot of the students, everything that I've learned, especially about gender identity and sexual orientation, I learned about 10 years ago or 6 years ago. And so it's all, we're all on a learning journey together. And so asking questions, don't judge yourself. The fact that you're here is huge. Okay, so now I'm going to get into some real not fun statistics. And this is kind of a look at the origins of a lot of QSAs, or queer student associations. This was, there's a study that is put together every few years through GLSEN, and it's a school climate survey. So they survey a lot of students in a lot of public and private schools throughout the country. 86% of LGBTQ plus students said that they were harassed at school, harassed or assaulted at school. 2 in 5 LGBTQ plus students of color were bullied or harassed based on their race or ethnicity. 84% of trans students felt unsafe at school because of gender. These are really hard to read statistics that an overwhelming majority of LGBT plus students have felt uncomfortable at school, not welcomed at school, and unsafe at school. And so the main suggestions that are given to schools is 4 main things: comprehensive anti-bullying and anti-discrimination policies. Which as a DEI director is something that we work on and communicate to teachers and to students. Teachers and school staff who are supportive of LGBTQ students, an LGBTQ inclusive curriculum, and also gender and sexuality alliances, and how important it is to have these safe space for all students, high school and middle school. Research tells us that LGBTQ2S, and 2S means two-spirit, which is going to be in our list of definitions later, are more likely to feel safe and are more comfortable being open about their sexual orientation, gender identity, and or their gender expression in schools with QSAs because they provide a safe place to create a sense of belonging. And so that belief here at St. Francis is why in 2018 the middle school QSA started with Ms. Campbell and Mr. Powell, our fearless QSA leaders. And we invited Tegan here to talk a little bit about, because you went to middle school, Tegan, here I'll move this over. We talked about how there wasn't one in your middle school when you were here, and also maybe some thoughts about that, and then what kind of the history of the QSA at the high school as well would be great.
Yeah, so I graduated from here in 2017, so I just missed the QSA forming, and I was definitely questioning my sexuality when I was here, and I felt very alone in that, even though the student body is overwhelmingly welcoming and, you know, pretty progressive. It still felt like I was the only person that was dealing with this, when obviously that is just not the case for anyone. And I think having that like sense of community and just togetherness, even if you don't, you know, feel like you are being threatened or bullied or anything like that, because I think at St. Francis that, you know, hopefully those statistics they don't ring true for St. Francis, but it makes you feel less alone. And I think that that is just the most important part of all of it. And then at the high school, I'm not sure when it was formed because I was still at the middle school. My sister was one of the founders of the QSA, and they just kind of wanted to start it like a, you know, Black Student Association or any of the other groups that we have at St. Francis. They wanted that sense of a safe space and just a place where people can gather and be together and feel like they have people supporting them. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure when it started, but it was a little while before Goshen, and I think it is really great that both places now have it. And we also at the high school have an affinity group, so anyone is welcome to come to QSA anytime. But you know, if you're in the community, but also if you're straight and cis, like you can just be an ally. And then we also have an affinity group called Q Club that meets on alternating weeks, and that is just where you can have like an extra safe space, because sometimes there are things that you don't really want to talk about with people that maybe don't fully understand because they aren't experiencing the same things as you are. And so we also have that, and I think that has also been really, really helpful.
All right, I'm going to pass the mic to Emily, who's going to talk a little bit about the QSA experience here at Goshen.
Yeah, so one thing that is often a question from parents and sometimes from students as well is about the use of the word queer. So I just wanted to address that right away. So the students named the group at the middle school the QSA, the Queer Student Association. And they chose that name for a few reasons. One reason is because it was the name the high school was using at the time. I think they still use it. Tegan's nodding, yep. So yes. And we wanted to have some connection with the high school in that way. And another reason is because the word queer is a word that can include many different identities in the LGBTQ plus spectrum. From the Human Rights Campaign, I pulled a quote. It says, "Queer serves as an umbrella term that encompasses many people as it intersects with sexual orientation and gender identity. It includes anyone who does not associate with heteronormativity. Rather, they have non-binary or gender expansive identities." Now, I will say that queer is one of the words that the LGBTQ plus community has sort of reclaimed. And for some people, it still hits the ear. It doesn't sound great, particularly LGBTQ plus people who are older than me. I've heard from people who are older than me who identify as LGBTQ plus that they still hear that word as a slur, and it can be used as a slur. And so my go-to rule for the language I use to describe other people is to use the language that they use to describe themselves. So if I say I identify as queer or I'm queer, then you can say Ms. Campbell is queer. That is totally fine to say. If I say I am a lesbian or if I say I'm gay, just use the language that I use. We put together a vocabulary list, and I will tell you while Ms. Serrano is pulling it up. We showed this to the QSA yesterday, and I read them off the words on this great list that I had put together, and they were like, hold up, Ms. Campbell, you left off so much stuff. I put a note at the top that says some of this was copied from the Human Rights Campaign, some of it I added, and a lot of it the kids added yesterday, because the language around gender and sexuality and just identity language in general is always evolving and changing. And so you might see something that I missed. You might see words you don't know. There were plenty of words on here that the kids told me yesterday that I didn't know and had to look up. And this is all in the slideshow, which I
will put in the chat while we're doing Q&A.
Yeah, so you can access it too. There might be new words on here for you. There were plenty of new words on here for me. But again, a good rule is use the language that people use to describe themselves. And if people's language about themselves changes, go with the flow, change with it. Just a good general rule. You can tell this is a lengthy list. All right, I think we're gonna go back to the slideshow. Can you go to the next one? So what happens in a QSA meeting? This is another question I get a lot from parents. What do we do? Well, it depends. We act in the middle school at Goshen. Sometimes we act like a support group where kids can come and talk about things that they're thinking about, things that they're feeling, things that they're struggling with, just what things that are going on at school, and they can find a safe place to find support. Sometimes we do fun stuff, and sometimes things do get serious, and we talk about serious things that are going on in the world. A list of things we've done at Goshen. These were just things that I thought of while we were working on this. This year, the kids are very into watching cartoons. They love cartoons that feature LGBTQ plus stories. So we've watched The Owl House, and we've watched She-Ra and the Princess of Power, and there's always some talk about cartoons because this group this year, that's what they're into. So Mr. Powell and I are learning to be into it too. We have talked about legislature at the state level that discriminates against the LGBTQ plus community. Actually, next week we're teaming up with the Culture Club to do some letter writing to our representatives. We're going to write some letters about some anti-trans legislation that's coming through Kentucky right now, and then we're also going to write some letters to Congress about gun legislation that we think would be helpful in preventing gun violence. So it's a really cool way that we're teaming up with the Culture Club. Sometimes we just hang out and eat snacks, and that's always fun and very silly. We have had conversations about ways to make St. Francis a more inclusive and welcoming place for LGBTQ plus students, faculty, parents, visitors, whoever. And the kids have presented at morning meeting about events and issues that affect LGBTQ plus people. Some of the kids are going to present at a morning meeting coming up about our letter writing that we're doing next week. We did a presentation for Black History Month about important Black people who were also LGBTQ plus. That was a cool one. We do all kinds of stuff, and it really depends on what the kids are interested in, what they're passionate about. It evolves and changes every year. This is my favorite slide in the whole slideshow. Yesterday we talked to the QSA, and we showed them the whole slideshow. They knew we were meeting with parents, and we just said, you know, if you had the opportunity to say whatever you want to a group of parents who are learning about the QSA in the middle school, what would you want to tell them? And I was just typing frantically while they were talking. So I'm just going to read you some of the things that they said. There's some really good stuff in here. So one of the kids said, I want parents to know that while we're in middle school, we're thinking about who we are all the time. QSA is a place where it's safe to talk about those things. Being here makes me feel like I can talk about things I might not talk about at home, because when I'm around queer and questioning people, I feel like I can trust them. It's nice. And I agree, it is nice. Wanting to experiment doesn't mean you are those things. It just means you want to explore all the options. And I think that should be allowed. Kids don't deserve to feel unsafe in their everyday lives. They don't deserve to feel invalid or less than, or feel like an outcast. This is my favorite because it sounds like we're all 1,000 years old. We understand that it's hard because you were raised in a different time. I like that a lot. And you're not used to it. But all we want is for you to try to be open and supportive. We want you to be someone we can talk to. It starts out funny, but it ends really good. And the last one says, just because your kid is here, it doesn't mean they're queer. It just means they are a supportive and nice individual. Which is really cool. I'm going to ask Mr. Powell, did you want to add anything to what a normal QSA meeting at Goshen looks like?
So I think you did a pretty good job of covering what meetings look like. So like Mrs. Campbell said, it really varies from one week to the next. They go from very lighthearted and fun, just kind of chilling, hanging out, sometimes watching cartoons, to some days we have very heavy conversations where there's tears and tissues and hugs, and it really turns into a support group for a kid who maybe needs support that week for whatever reason, for whatever's going on with them. So it can then crosses into activism, like she said, with the letter writing we're doing with the Culture Club right now. I think maybe some of my favorite things that we do is anytime we present at morning meeting. I love to see the kids present about queer issues at morning meeting. I love that because it gives them a chance to really talk to the larger school community and share what's important to them with the rest of their classmates.
I'm going to ask if Tegan would like to share what a high school QSA meeting is like. Tegan's having lunch too, so I'm going to give her a second.
Yeah, it's pretty similar at the high school to what everyone has said about the middle school. It's mostly like, it goes with the flow. It changes every week, just depending on what people want to talk about. We have different presentations from different students. So like someone can come in and say like, well, I really want to talk about this specific topic. And then they make a whole presentation about it. We have teamed up with the high school's BSA as well to do things like they've done at the middle school. It can get really serious. It can also be just like a great safe space that is really fun and lighthearted. It really changes. It's very similar to what you all have said. But yeah, I think the main thing is that we do a lot of presentations about current events. And that is what the high schoolers at least have really wanted to focus on, and just talk about current issues that, maybe you've heard about, but you don't really know all the details. And so you get more of a like well-rounded perspective because someone has like thoroughly researched it and then presents it. So yeah, that's mainly what we do at the high school.
Thank you, Tegan.
No
Awesome.
One thing that was also interesting to me is a lot of times when I've been able to be lucky enough to be a part of the QSA meetings and talk to students, that this is not something that students automatically start thinking about once they hit 5th grade. Like a lot of times these are things that kids are thinking about in lower school as well. And so I'm really also happy to see so many lower school families on the call today. And so we are also looking for ways when we're talking about supporting students, and we're talking about students of all ages. And so Ms. Marks is going to talk a little bit about how can I support my child if they are coming to QSA, or if they are too young for QSA but are starting to have questions. Thank you, Ms. Marks, for putting this piece together for us.
You're welcome. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see so many parents on this call. I just want to start with the idea that being LGBTQ plus is not a phase. As Lindsay talked about at the beginning of our presentation, children, and as the kids actually said, kids are exploring their identity of who they are, how they see themselves, who they're attracted to. Some kids might have a really strong idea of that early on. Other kids are trying to figure it out. That's a normal part of adolescent development. So really looking at it as a journey is a really important place to start because your children really need support and validation. And the more they have that, the more likely they are to come to you and be open to talking to you. And we'll talk about that in a minute. For some, understanding their gender identity and sexuality is something that happens at an early age. Maybe some of you have experienced that either with your own children or with other children you know, that they might be 5 and 6 years old and really have this strong sense of this is who I am, this is how I want to dress and how I want to present myself, for example. For other kids, it's much later. It can be ongoing into teen and even adulthood. Oftentimes the idea of stigma, of how I'm going to be judged, am I going to be rejected or accepted by my family, my friends, that can really keep LGBTQ people from coming out as children or even as teenagers, that fear of what's going to happen when I do this. Just a little bit about research and statistics. It's, unfortunate, very alarming. We all have probably heard some of this before. LGBTQ plus children, adolescents are at the greatest risk of suicide. Obviously not because of who they are, but because of the rejection, the bullying, and the victimization that they might face. That is another reason why having support from family and from school is so crucial, honestly, for their safety and well-being. The most important thing as a parent, and this applies obviously to any and all issues that your children come to you with, is being supportive and empathetic. All of us want to feel loved, we want to feel supported, and the more we feel those things, the greater resilience that we have. Right? So we want resilience for our kids in all kinds of ways. And the more we can be there for our kids and support them, the greater their resilience will be. I do want to say it is very normal, natural, understandable as a parent to have your own feelings about your child, about the person that they are, how you see them in their life, and you're entitled to whatever feeling you have about that. What's really important though is to understand as a parent, if your child is questioning their sexuality, their gender identity, and it's a big struggle for you, and you have a lot of negative emotion about that, it's really important that you be able to process that, because you need to do that as a parent, but it really needs to be away from your child. That's something you're doing with other adults, with a therapist, whomever is important in your life, but that not be something that gets put on your child. What is totally acceptable though is to have honest conversations with your kids. If your child is coming to you questioning their gender, their sexuality, they want to have a conversation, you feel like they're kind of like putting a toe in the water, like how are you all going to react to this? It's totally okay to be honest. As long as that honesty starts with, okay, I love you, I support you, and this is new to me. I'm surprised by this, but I want to talk to you about it. I want to hear more. Or, I love you, I support you. I worry about how you're going to be treated by your friends. I worry about how our family might interact with you, accept you. I'm nervous about that, but I want to talk to you about it, and I want to be here to support you. Kids really, really, really value honesty, and they have these radars, and they know who's being honest with them and who is trying to sugarcoat something or present something in a non-genuine way. So it's okay to be honest with your kids. This is new for me. This is a lot for me to absorb, but I want to learn more, and I love you, and I'm going to work on it. But I just want you to know I'm having to process this, and that is totally acceptable to say to your kids. For any issue that your child deals with through childhood, questions about gender identity, sexuality, or anything else, drugs, alcohol, all the big things that our kids in their childhood and adolescence, ideally you want to be the place where they can land. You want to be the place where they know I can say these things, I can ask questions, I can be honest with my parent, and they're going to hear it without judgment. And I'm a parent of 2 teenagers, and I know from life experience, it's a really hard thing to do. It's really easy for me to say that, but it's another when your kids are coming at you and like internally maybe you're like freaking out, or you want to be like, oh my gosh, no, you're too young. But you kind of really have to practice that game face of like, I'm so glad you brought that to me. I'm really glad. I want to be able to talk to you about this. Or maybe even I have to educate myself a little bit. I'd love it if you could give me some information and we can talk about this together. So the more you can, again, kind of practice in those big moments, your reaction is really important for your kids. The best message you can give your kids is, I'm really glad you're telling me. Help me understand what's going on for you, as opposed to shutting them down or putting your own kind of spin on it, or your own judgment or opinions, trying to ask a lot of open-ended questions. That's really going to be the most helpful thing for your child. I'm going to give you a resource at the end about a podcast that I love. The psychologist is named Dr. Lisa D'Amour. D'Amour, I think is actually how she pronounces it. And she's amazing. And she has a podcast called Ask Lisa. And it's about all different parenting topics. But she actually has one about what to do if your child is questioning their gender identity. And a parent wrote her a letter, and she kind of goes through and breaks down the letter and gives her opinion as a psychologist of how to respond. And one thing she talks about is the idea of process over outcome. And I just really loved what she had to say. With our kids with lots and lots of issues, at the end of the day, we cannot control the outcome. We want to have influence. We want to teach them values and morals and how we approach life. But ultimately, we only have so much control over our kids. So the outcome of if your child is going to be questioning their gender identity, or who they're going to love, or how they want to express themselves, that's going to be up to them ultimately. So what you really want to focus on instead of the outcome is the process. The process of, I want them to talk to me. I want to have conversations about this. I want to help them through it. I want to try to understand. The more you can remind yourself, process over outcome, it's going to just really help you have a better relationship with your child, and allow them, again, to be able to communicate with you about this topic and, again, all the other big important topics that they're going to face in their life. This is a really important thing that I did want to mention. Sometimes kids feel more comfortable talking to their friends or even other adults about gender identity and sexuality before they come to you as their parent. The Trevor Project, which is another great resource, a study they did found that most of the kids and adolescents that responded disclosed their sexual orientation and gender identity to friends first, then trusted adults who may not always be their parents. Sometimes with kids, you can have the most wonderful parent-child relationship. And sometimes that even makes it a little more difficult. Your child might be hesitant of, I love my parents so much. I value their opinion of me so much. Even though I know they love me, I'm still worried. What if I say this? What if they don't respond well? What if they reject me? And I don't want anything to happen to our relationship. So sometimes having a really good, close relationship with your child can even make it a little more difficult. So it's just really important to remember, if your child has talked to other people, or you have an idea they might be questioning sexuality, gender identity, and they haven't come to you yet, it's not because you're not a good parent. It's not because they don't love and trust you. They're trying to figure all this out too. Even with loving, open-minded parents, as the kids said, there's still often a divide in how we understand gender and sexuality. You know, Emily mentioned that some of the terms and vocabulary the students were bringing up, she had to research. She had to look up. We're all like playing catch up and learning. And as much as we want to be there for our kids and understand what they're going through, we totally don't. And so sometimes there is that divide that our kids feel. So again, it's really important to try not to personalize if your kids are talking to other people or they want to be a part of the QSA and that feels like their safe space. It's not because they don't love and value you as a parent. They just maybe need a different space to work through it. And then just a few pointers. Your parent-child relationship is a wonderful model for your child for what love looks like. whoever it is they're going to love in their life, you are their model for what that is. And so ideally, we all want to be modeling respect, openness, inclusivity. So just, again, one way of thinking about it, if your child is talking to you about where they are in their life and their gender and their sexual orientation, and if they're questioning some of that, you are showing them, I love you, I'm going to respond to you in this way. And that's teaching them what healthy relationships and love look like, whomever it is that they end up loving. It's important to always use the names and the pronouns that align with your child's gender identity. So if your child comes to you and says, look, I am biologically female, but I want to start using male pronouns. And I'm asking my teachers and my classmates and you as my parents to use those. It's really important as their parent to honor that. Does it mean that that's always going to be the pronouns they want to use? Not necessarily, but in this moment, that's their reality and their truth, and it's really important to honor that for your kids. It's important to be your child's advocate. When you're out in your daily life or on social media or wherever you encounter biased speech, ideally, if you're comfortable, it's really important to model for other people how to respect your child's identity. It's also important as a parent, if you have a child who's questioning their sexuality, their gender identity, to educate yourself. What are the issues facing LGBTQ youth and adults? How can I be an ally? What information do I need to know to better educate myself and be a support for my child? Of course, obviously, assure your child that you have unconditional love and support for them. And it's really important for kids to hear you speaking positively about them and their experience to other people. It really shows your child you're not just giving them the support and you're not just kind of saying a lot of words to them in that moment, but you truly, genuinely want to live the support that you're offering. And by seeing you model that and by talking to other people and showing your support to others, that's really just so affirming for kids. And then, as I mentioned, just some resources, the Trevor Project, you can just Google that, and there's a wonderful guide you can download, and it's the Guide to Being an Ally to Transgender and Non-Binary Youth. And so what you'll do is you look under the resource tab, and then you can find that. And then again, the podcast, Ask Lisa. I just think it's wonderful. Again, she covers just any kind of parenting topic you can think of. She's fantastic. And then episode 24 is the particular one about the person who has a daughter questioning her gender. And then this is the list of information about pronouns that Emily wrote up and the vocabulary that she shared. And then Lindsay made a book list of some wonderful, diverse books.
You want to talk about the pronouns?
So the pronouns page, I pulled a lot of that from other resources, but it's just a really quick why are pronouns important? Why does it matter what pronouns you use? What are pronouns even? And what to do if you make a mistake. I really like that part. If you make a mistake with someone's pronouns, apologize and move on and try to do better next time. I make mistakes with pronouns and, just, I'm so sorry. I will do better next time. And when I'm corrected by kids or whoever in my life, it's like, I'm so sorry. I will do better. And then that's it. No big deal. I will do better. That's it. There are also a list of pronouns. Many people will go by he, him, or she, her. There are plenty of people in the world who identify as they and them. And then there are also some other pronouns like Z or Z. I don't personally know anyone who uses those pronouns, but I have heard people, I know that those are pronouns that people use. And if I don't know, I just use people's names. Lindsay is awesome, not she is awesome, if I don't know. So just a little bit of information. And then if Ms. Serrano, do you want to talk about the books?
Yes, this is a resource especially helpful for preschool, lower school, middle school, and then early high school as well. This is through the Human Rights Campaign's Welcoming Schools program, which Ms. Campbell and I both went to a training for a couple of years ago. And they have an enormous set of book lists, and each book list has more book lists on site. So as your librarian, I also got really excited with book lists on top of book lists on top of book lists. One great way to start conversations, and especially at our youngest ages, is to incorporate more books with LGBTQ characters just as part of your regular reading routine. In middle school, there are a lot of reading options in language arts that feature queer characters, and there's a growing collection in the library, but having books on hand, especially with our youngest students, just makes the conversation come more naturally, and is great to start having these conversations young. Not only books with LGBTQ characters, but also diverse families. Showing the family unit in a variety of different ways, I think, is really important, especially for our youngest readers, and a great way to talk about what makes a family, and then get into conversations about what does it mean to be gender fluid, what does it mean to be transgender, what does it mean to be non-binary. There are picture books for all of these things. I also tell my middle school students, don't sleep on picture books. They should still be reading picture books. And Ms. Marks sent me a really great article about how important it is to continue reading a variety of books all through your education career, because a lot of these topics have made it into picture books, but hasn't been in upper grades as often. So it's a really great way to start having these conversations. All of these resources are going to be in the slideshow that, while we're asking questions, I will work on putting into the chat. So unless there's something I have for...
Can I add something?
Yes.
Of course.
I think I have a very interesting perspective about like coming out to your parents, because I have gay parents, and so then when I came out, it was still a struggle for me, and it was still, they struggled with it as well, and they weren't, you know, perfect, and they didn't do everything completely right, and they still don't, and like, so obviously love them, but like they still aren't perfect, and so, you know, it is a struggle for everyone, especially if, you know, you aren't experienced with any of these topics before, and they were, and they still, you know, didn't handle it perfectly. And so I think it's just really important, like, it doesn't reflect badly on you as a parent if this does not come naturally, because even if, like, I knew that my parents are going to accept me, and I wasn't going to get kicked out or anything like that, but it was still a thing that was difficult for me to do and come to terms with. And I talked to my sisters beforehand and my friends beforehand. And so I went through all of the same process, even though I was not scared that my parents weren't going to accept me. So I think that that is just a really important thing. Ms. Marks already said this, but you know, your kids still love you. And even if they don't come to you first, it doesn't mean that they don't think you're going to accept them. It's just a very scary thing in and of itself. And even if they know that you will still love them and they know that you will support them, they might not come to you first, and it might still be something that is hard for them to do. So yeah, that's all I have to add.
Thank you, Tegan.
So what questions do all of you have?
Lindsay, do you want to stop recording?
I have a question.